Theme 8: Peasant, Zamindars and the State, Agrarian Society and the Mughal Empire, see 16th to 17th centuries. During the 16th and 17th centuries, about 85% of the population of India lived in its village. Both peasants and landed elites were involved in agricultural production and claimed right to a share of the produce. This created relationships of cooperation, competitions, and conflict among them. The sum of this agrarian relationship made up rural society. At the same time, agencies from outside also entered into the rural world. Most important among these was the Mughal state, which derived the bulk of its income from agricultural production. Agents of the state, revenue, assessors, collectors, record keepers, sought to control rural society so as to ensure that cultivation took place and the state got its regular share of taxes from the produce. Since many crops were grown for sale, trade, money, and market entered the villages and linked the agricultural areas with the towns. A rural scene detailed from the 17th century Mughal painting. 1. Peasants and agricultural production. The basic unit of agricultural society was the village inhabited by peasants who performed the manifold seasonal tasks that made up agricultural production throughout the year. Tilling the soil, sowing seeds, harvesting the crops when it was ripe. Further, they contributed their labor to the production of agro-based goods such as sugar and oil. But rural India was not characterized by subtle peasant production alone. Several kinds of areas such as large tracts of dry land or hilly regions were not cultivated in the same way as the more fertile expanse of land. In addition, forest areas made up a substantial proportion of territory. We need to keep this varied topography in mind when discussing agrarian society. Looking for sources. Our understanding of the working of rural societies does not come from those who work the land as peasants did not write about themselves. Our major sources for the agrarian history of 16th and early 17th century are chronicles and documents from Mughal court. See also chapter 9. One of the most important chronicle was the Ain-e-Akbari. In short, the Ain. See also section 8, authored by Akbar's court historian Abul Fazl. This text meticulously recorded the arrangement made by the state to ensure cultivation, to enable the collection of revenue by the agencies of the state, and to regulate the relationship between the state and rural magazine, the Zamindars. Rural magnates, the Zamindars. The central purpose of the Ain was to present a vision of Akbar's empire where social harmony was provided by a strong ruling class. Any revolt or assertion of autonomous power against the Mughal state was, in the eyes of author of the Ain, predestined to fail. In other words, whatever we learn from the Ain about present remain a view from the top. Fortunately, however, the account of the Ain can be supplemented by description contained in sources emanating from regions away from the Mughal capital. This includes detailed revenue records from Gujarat, Maharashtra, and Rajasthan dating from the 17th and 18th centuries. Further, the extensive record of the East India Company, see also chapter 10, provide us with useful description of agrarian relations in eastern India. All these sources record instances of conflicts between present Jamindar and the state. In the process, they give us an insight into peasant perception and their exception of fairness from the state, peasants and their lands. The term which Indo-Persian sources of Mughal period most frequently used to denote a peasant was Rayat, plural Raya, or Mujarian. In addition, we also encountered the term Kishan or Asami. Sources of the 17th century refers to two kinds of peasant, khut kasta and pahi kasta. The former were residents of the village in which they held their lands. The latter were non-resident cultivators who belonged to some other village but cultivated land elsewhere on a contractual basis. People become pahikasta either out of choice, for example, when terms of revenue in a distant village were more favorable, or out of compulsion, for example, forced by economic distress after a famine. Seldom did the average peasant of North India possess more than a pair of bullocks and two plough. Most processed remain less. In Gujarat, peasants possessing about 6 acres of land were considered to be affluent. In Bengal, on the other hand, 5 acres was the upper limit of an average peasant farm. 10 acres would make one a rich Assami. Cultivation was based on the principle of individual ownership. Peasant lands were bought and sold in the same way as the lands of other property owners. This 19th century description of peasant holding in the Delhi Agra region would apply equally to the 17th century. The cultivating peasant, Assamese, who plow up the field, mark the limit of each field for identification and demarcation with borders of raised earth, bricks, and thrown, so that thousands of such fields may be counted in a village. Peasants on the move. This was a feature of agrarian society who struck a keen observer like Babur, the first Mughal emperor, forcefully enough for him to write about it in the Baburnama, his memories. In Hindustan, hamlets and village town indeed were depopulated and set up in a moment. If the people of a large town, one inhabited for years even, flee from it, they do it in such a way that not a sign or trace of them remain in a day and a half. On the other hand, if they fix their eyes on a place to settle, they need not dig water courses because their crops are all rain grounds, and as the population of Hindustan is unlimited, it swarms in. They make a tank or a well. They need not build houses or set up walls. Khas grass abounds. Wood is unlimited. Hearts are made, and straight away there is a village or a town. Describe the aspect of agricultural life that struck Babur as particular to region in northern India. Comment this. Irrigation and technology. The abundance of land available, labor, and the mobility of peasants were three factors that accounted for the constant expansion of agriculture. Since the primary purpose of agriculture is to feed people, basic staples such as rice, wheat, or millets were the most frequent cultivated crop areas, which receive 40 inches or more of rainfall a year, were generally rice producing zone, followed by wheat and millet corresponding to a descending scale of precipitation. Monsoons remain the backbone of Indian agriculture as they are even today, but there were crops which require additional water. Artificial system of irrigation had to be devised for this. Irrigating trees and fields. This is an excerpt from the Baburnama that describes the irrigation device the emperor observed in northern India. The greater part of Hindustan country is situated on level land. Many, though its town and cultivated lands are at nowhere has running water. For water is not at all a necessity in cultivating crops and orchard. Autumn crops grow by the downpour of the rains themselves, and strange it is that spring crops grow even when no rains fall. However, to young trees, water is made to flow by means of buckets or wells. In Lahore, Dipalpur, both the present day in Pakistan and those other parts, people water by means of a well. They make two circles of rope long enough to shoot the depth of the well, fix strips of wood between them, and on this fasten pitcher, the rope with the wood and attached pitcher are put over the well. At one end of the wheel axle, a second wheel is fixed and close to it, another one a upright axle. The last wheel the bullock turns its teeth catch in the teeth of the second wheel, and thus the wheel with the pitchers is turned. Its throw is set while the water empties from the pitcher, and from this the water is conveyed everywhere. In Agra, Chandabar, Bayana, or in present-day Uttar Pradesh, And those part again, people water with a bucket at the village. They set up a fork of wood having a roller adjusted between the forks, tie a rope to a large bucket, put the rope over the roller, and tie its other end to the bullocks. One person must drive the bullocks, another empty the bucket. A reconstructed Persian wheel described here. Compare the irrigation devices observed by Babur with what you have learned about irrigation in Vijayanagara chapter 7. What kind of resource would each of these systems require? Who each system could ensure the participation of peasant in improving agricultural technology? Comment this. Irrigation project receive state support as well. For example, in northern India, the state undertook digging of new Camel Nahr Nala and also repaired old one like the Shanar in the Punjab during Shah Jahan's regime. Sergeant's reigns. Though agriculture was labor-intensive, peasants did use technologies that often had cattle energy. One example was the wooden plow, which was light and easily assembled with an iron tip or coulter. It therefore did not make deep furrow, which preserved the moisture better during the intensely hot months. A drill pulled by a pair of giant oxen was used to plant seed, but broadcasting of seed was the most prevalent method. Hoeing and weeding were done simultaneously using a narrow iron plate with a small wooden handle. The spread of tobacco, the plant which arrived first in the Deccan, the spread to northern India in the early year of the 17th century. The Ain does not mention tobacco. In the list of crops in northern India, Akbar and his nobles came across tobacco for the first time in 1604. At this time, smoking tobacco in hookah or chillum seems to have caught on in a big way. Jahangir was so concerned about his addiction and he banned it. This was totally ineffective because by the end of the 17th century, tobacco had become a major article of consumption, cultivation, and trade all over India. An abundance of crops. Agriculture was organized around two major seasonal cycles. The Kharif means autumns and the Rabi means springs. This would mean that most regions, except those trained that were the most arid or inhospitable, produce a minimum of two crops a year to fasla. Whereas some, where rainfall or irrigation assured a continuous supply of water, even gave three crops, this ensured an enormous variety of produce. For instance, we are told in the Ain that the Mughal provinces of Agra produced 39 varieties of crops and Delhi produced 43 over the two seasons. Bengal produces 50 varieties of rice alone. Agricultural prosperity and population growth. One important outcome of such varied and flexible form of agricultural production was a slow demographic growth despite periodic disruption caused by famines and epidemic. India's population increased, according to calculation by economic historian, by about 50 million people between 1600 and 1800, which is an increase of about 33% over 200 years. However, the focus on the cultivation of basic staples did not mean that agriculture in medieval India was only for subsistence. We often come across the term jinsi kamil. Literary perfect crops in our sources. The Mughal state also encouraged peasants to cultivate such crops as they brought in more revenue. Crops such as cotton and sugar cane where GNC Camel par excellence. Cotton was grown over a great swath of territory spread over central India and the Deccan Plateau, whereas Bengal was famous for its sugar. Such cash crops would also include various sorts of wild seeds, for example, mustard and lentils. This shows how subsistence and commercial production were closely intertwined in an average peasant's holding. During the 17th century, several new crops from different parts of the world reached the Indian subcontinent. Maize, Makkah, for example, was introduced into India via Africa and Spain, and by 17th century it was being listed as one of the major crops of Western India. Vegetables like tomato, potatoes, and chilies were introduced from the New World at this time, as were fruit like the pineapple and the papaya. Discuss. Identify the technologies and agricultural practices described in this section that appear similar to or different from those described in chapter 2. Comment this. To the village community. The above account makes it clear that agricultural production involved the intensive participation and initiative of the peasantry. How did this affect the structure of agrarian relation in Mughal society? To find out, let us look at the social group involved in agricultural expansion and add their relationship and conflicts. We have seen that peasants held their lands in individual ownership. At the same time, they belonged to a collective village community as far as many aspects of their social existence were concerned. There were three constituents of this community: the cultivators, the panchayat, and the village headman, Muqaddam or Mandal. An early 19th century painting depicting a village in the Punjab describe what women and men are shown doing in the illustration as well as the architecture of the village. Comment this. Caste and the rural milieu. Deep inequalities on the basis of caste and other caste-like distinction meant that the cultivators were a highly heterogeneous group. Among those who tilled the land, there was a sizable number who worked as menials or agricultural laborers major. Despite the abundance of cultivable land, certain caste groups are assigned menial tasks and thus relegated to poverty. Though there was no census at the time, the little data that we have suggests that such groups comprised a large section of the village population, had the least resources, uh, and were constrained by their position in the caste hierarchy. Much like the Dalits of modern India, such distinction had begun permeating into others. Communities too. In Muslim communities, many else like halal Quran scavengers were housed outside the boundaries of the village. Similarly, the Mullah Jadas, literally sons of boatmen in Bihar, were comparable to slaves. There was a direct correlation between caste, poverty, and social status at the lower strata of society. Such correlation were not so marked at intermediate levels. In a manual from 17th century, Marwar Rajputs are mentioned as peasants, sharing the same space with Jats, who were accorded a lower status in the caste hierarchy. The Guru Gauravas, who cultivated land around Brindaban, Uttar Pradesh, South Rajput status in the 17th century. Castes such as the Ahirs, Gujars, and Malis rose in the hierarchy because of the profitability of the cattle rearing and horticulture. In the eastern region, intermediate pastoral and fishing castes like the Sadgops and Kaivartas acquired the status of peasant, panchayats, and headmen. The village panchayat was an assembly of elders, usually important people of the village with hereditary rights over their property. In mixed caste villages, the panchayat was usually a heterogeneous body and oligarchy. The panchayat represented various castes and communities in the village, though the village manual cum agricultural worker was unlikely to be represented there. The decision made by these panchayats were binding on the member. The panchayat was headed by a headman known as Muqaddam or Mandal. Some sources suggest that the headman was chosen through the consensus of the village elder and that the choice had to be ratified by the Zamindars. Headmen held office as long as they enjoyed the confidence of the village elders, failing which they could be dismissed by them. The chief function of the headman was to supervise the preparation of village accounts, assisted by the accountant or patwari of the panchayat. Corrupt mandals. The mandals often misused their position. They were principally accused of defrauding village accounts in convenience with the patwari and for the undressing the revenue they owed from their own land in order to pass the additional burden on to the smaller cultivator. The panchayat derived its funds from contributions made by individuals to a common financial pool. These funds were used for defraying the cost of entertaining revenue officials who visited the village from time to time. Expenses for community welfare activities such as tiding over, natural calamities like floods were also made from these funds. Often these funds were also deployed in construction of a bund or digging a canal, which peasants usually could not afford to do on their own. On one important function of the panchayat was to ensure the caste boundaries among the various communities inhabiting the village were upheld. In eastern India, all marriages were held in the presence of the mandal. In other words, one of the duties of the village headman was to oversee the conduct of the members of village community, chiefly to prevent any offense against their caste. An early 19th century painting depicting a meeting of village elders and a tax collectors. How has the artist differentiated between the village elders and the tax collectors? Comment this. Panchayat also held the authority to levy fines and inflict more serious forms of punishment like expulsion from the community. The latter was a drastic step and was in most cases meted out for a limited period. It meant that a person forced to leave the village became an outcast and lost his right to practice his profession. Such a measure was intended as a deterrent to violation of caste norm. In addition to the village panchayat, each caste or jati in the village had its own Jati Panchayat. These panchayats wielded considerable power in rural society. In Rajasthan, Jati Panchayat at arbitrated civil disputes between members of different castes. They mediated in contested claims on land, decided whether marriage was performed according to the norms laid down by a particular caste group, determined who had ritual precedence in village function and so on. In most cases, except in matters of criminal justice, the state respected the decision of Jati Panchayat. Archival records from Western India, notably Rajasthan and Maharashtra, contain petitions presented to the Panchayat complaining about the extortionate taxation or the demand for unpaid labor or beggar imposed by the superior castes or official by the state. These petitions were usually made by villagers from the lowest ranks of rural society. Often petitions were made collectively as well by a caste group or a community protesting against what they considered were morally illegitimate demands on the part of elite groups. This included excessive tax demand, which, especially in times of drought or other disaster, endangered the peasant subsistence. In the eyes of the petitioner, the right to the basic minimum for survival was sanctioned by customs. They regarded the village panchayat as the court of appeal that would ensure that the state carried out its moral obligation and guaranteed justice. A 17th century painting depicting textile production describes the activities that are shown in the illustration and comment this. The decision of the panchayat in conflicts between lower caste, peasant, and state official for the local zamindars could vary from the case to case. In cases of excessive revenue demand, the panchayat often suggested compromise. In cases where reconciliation failed, peasants took recourse to more drastic forms of resistance, such as deserting the village. The relatively easy availability of uncultivated land and the competition over labor resources made this an effective weapon in the hands of cultivators. Village artisans. Another interesting aspect of the village was the elaborate relationship of exchange between different producers. Marathi documents and village survey made in the early years of British rule have revealed the existence of substantial numbers of artisans, sometimes as high as 25% of the total household in the village. At times, however, the distinction between artisan and peasant in village society was a fluid one, as many groups performed the tasks of both. Cultivators and their families would also participate in craft production such as dyeing, textile printing, baking, and firing of pottery, making and repairing agricultural implements. Phases in the agricultural calendar when there was a relative lull in activity and between sowing and weeding or between weeding and harvesting were a time when cultivators could engage in artisanal production. Village artisans, potters, blacksmiths, carpenters, barbers, even goldsmiths provided specialized service in return for which they were compensated by village by a variety of means. The most common way of doing so was by giving them a share of the harvest or an atonement of land, perhaps cultivable wastage, which was likely to be decided by the panchayat. In Maharashtra, such lands become the artisan mirrors or watan, their hereditary holding. Another variant of this was a system where artisans and individual peasant households entered into a mutually negotiated system of remuneration, most of the time goods of services. For example, 18th century record tell us the zamindars in the Bengal who remunerated blacksmith, carpenter, even goldsmith for their work by paying them a small daily allowance and diet money. This latter came to be described as the Jajmani system. Though the term was not in vogue in the 16th and 17th countries, such evidence is interesting because it indicates the intricate ways in which exchange networks operated at the micro level of the village. Cash remuneration was not entirely unknown either. A little republic. How does one understand the significance of the village community? Some British officials in the 19th century saw the village as a little republic made of the fraternal partners sharing resource and labor in a collective. However, this was not a sign of rural egalitarianism. There was individual ownership of assets and deep inequalities based on caste and gender distinction. A group of powerful individuals decided the affair of the village, exploited the weaker section, and had the authority to dispense justice. More importantly, a caste nexus had already developed through trade between villages and towns. In the Mughal heartland too, revenue was assessed and collected in cash. Artisans producing for the export market, for example, weavers, received their advances or wages in cash, as did producer of commercial products like cotton, silk, indigo. Discuss in what ways do you think the panchayat described in the section were similar to or different from present day gram panchayats? Comment this. Money in the village. The 17th century French traveler Jean Baptiste Tavernier found it remarkable that in the India a village must be very small indeed if has not a money changer called a shop. They act as bankers to make remittance of money and who enhance the rupee as they please for paisa and the paisa for this crowd itself. A shop at work. 3. Women in agrarian society. As you may have observed in many different societies, the production processes often involve men and women performing certain specified roles. In that context that we are exploring, women and men had to work shoulder to shoulder in the field. Men tilled and plowed while women sowed, weeded, threshed, winnowed the harvest. With the growth of nucleated village and expansion in individual peasant farming, which characteristics medieval Indian agriculture? The basics of production was the labor and the resource of the entire household. Naturally, a gender segregation between the home for women and world for men was not possible in this context. Nonetheless, bias is related to women's biological function did continue. Menstruating women, for instance, were not allowed to touch the plough for the potter's wheel in Western India or enter the groves where betel leaves, pan, were grown in Bengal. Artisanal tasks such as spinning yarn, sifting, and kneading clay for pottery and embroidery were among the many aspects of production dependent on female labor. The more commercialized the product, the greater the demand on women's labor to produce it. In fact, peasant and artisan women worked not only in the field but even went to the houses of their employers or to the markets if necessary. A woman spinning thread. Women are considered an important resource in agrarian society also because they were child bearers in a society dependent on labor. At the same time, high mortality rates among women owing to malnutrition, frequent pregnancies, death during childbirth often meant a shortage of wives. This led to the emergence of social customs in peasant and artisan communities that were distinct from those prevalent among elite group. Marriage in many rural communities required the payment of the bride price rather than dowry to the bride's family. Remarriage was considered legitimate both among divorced and widowed women. The importance attached to women as a reproductive process also meant that the fear of losing control over them was great. According to establishment social norms, the household was headed by a male. Thus, women were kept under strict control by the male members of the family and the community. They could inflict draconian punishment if they suspected infidelity on the part of the woman. The construction of Fatehpur Sikri women crushing stones. Documents from Western India, Rajasthan, Gujarat, and Maharashtra. Records petitions sent by women to the village panchayat seeking redress and justice. Wives protested against the infidelity of their husband or the neglect of the wife and children by the male head of the household. The grihasti. While male infidelity was not always punished, the state as superior caste group did intervene when it came to ensuring that the family was adequately provided for. In most cases, when women petitions to the panchayat, their names were then excluded from the record. The petitioner was referred to as the mother, sister, or wife of the male head of the household. Among the landed gentry, women had the right to inherit property. Instances from the Punjab show that women, including widow, actively participated in the rural land market as seller of property inherited by them. Hindu and Muslim women inherited zamindars which they were free to sell or mortgage. Women zamindars were known in 18th century Bengal. In fact, one of the biggest, the most famous of the 18th century zamindars, that of Rajshahi, had a woman at the helm. Women carrying load migrant from the neighboring village from work at such construction sites. Discuss, are there any differences in the access man and woman have to agricultural land in your state? Comment this. For forest and tribes beyond settled village. There was more to rural India than sedentary agriculture. Apart from the intensively cultivated provinces in northern and northern western India, huge swaths of fruit, dense forest, jungle, or scrubland, khadbandi, existed all over the eastern India, central India, northern India, including the Terai on the Indo-Nepal border, Jharkhand, and in the peninsular India, down the western Ghats and the Deccan Plateau. Though it is nearly impossible to set an all-India average of the forest cover for this period, informed conjectures based on contemporary sources suggest an average of 40%. Painting of Shah Jahan hunting nilgais from the Badshahnama describe what you see in the painting. What is the symbolic element that help establish the connection between the hunt and ideal justice? Comment this. Forest dwellers were termed jungli in contemporary texts. Being jungli, however, did not mean an absence of civilization. As popular uses of the term today seems to connote rather the term of describe those whose livelihood came from the gathering of forest produce, hunting, and shifting agriculture. These activities were largely season specific. Among the fields, for example, spring was reserved for collecting forest produce, summer for fishing, the monsoon month for cultivation, and autumn and winter for hunting. Such a sequence presumed an perpetuated mobility, which was a distinctive feature of tribes inhabiting this forest. Forested, the forest was a subversive place, a place of refuge, mawas for troublemaker. Once again, we turn to Babur, who says that jungles provided a good defense uh, behind which the people of the Pargana become stubbornly rebellious and pay no taxes. Inroads into forest. External forces enter the forest in different ways. For instance, the state required elephant for the army. So the Peshkas levied from the forest people often included a supply of elephants. In the Mughal political ideology, the hunt symbolized the overwhelming concern of the state to relate to all its subjects, rich and poor. Regular hunting expeditions, so court historians tell us, enabled the emperor to travel across the extensive territories of his empire and personally attend to the grievances of its inhabitants. The hunt was a subject frequently painted by court artists. The painter resorted to the device of inserting a small scene somewhere in the picture that functioned as a symbol of a harmonious reign. Pargana was an administrative subdivision of a Mughal province. Peskas was a form of tribute collected by the Mughal state. Clearance of forest for agricultural settlements. This is an excerpt from a 6th century Bengali poem, Chandi Mangala, composed by the Mukundaram Chakraborty. The hero of the poem, Kalketu, set up a kingdom by a clearing forest. Hearing the news, outsiders came from the various clans. Kalketu then bought the distributor among them. Heavily knives, axes, battle axes, and pikes. From the north came the Das people. The 100 of them advanced. They were struck to the wonder on seeing Kalketu, who distributed betel nard to each of them. From south came the harvester, 500 of them under one organizer. From the west came Jafarmian, together with 2,000 men. Sulaimani bears in their hands, they chanted the names of their Pir and Paigambir prophet. Having cleared the forest, they established market. Hundreds and hundreds of foreigners ate and entered the forest. Hearing the sound of the axe, tiger became apprehensive and ran away roaring. What forms of instructions into the forest does the text evoke? Compare its masses with that of the miniature painting in Figure 8.9, who are the people and identified as foreigners from the perspective of the forest dwellers. Comment this. Trade between the hills tribe and the plains. See 1595. This is how Abul Fazl describes the transaction between the hills tribes and the plain in the Suba of Awadh, part of present-day Uttar Pradesh. From the northern mountains, quantities of goods are carried on the backs of men, of stout ponies, and of the goods such as gold, copper, lead, marks, tails of the Kutas cow, the yak, honey, chuck, an acid composed of orange juice and lemon boiled together, pomegranate seed, ginger, long pepper, machit, a plant producing a red dye, root, borax, geodori, a root resemble turmeric, wax, woolen stuff, wooden wire, hawks, falcon, black falcon, marlins, kind of birds, and other articles in exchange. They carry back white and colored clothes, amber, salt, asafoetida, ornaments, glass, and earthenware. What are the modes of transport described in these passages? Why do you think they were used? Explain what each of the articles brought from the plains to the hills may have been used for. Comment this. A peasant and a hunter listening to a Sufi singer. The spread of commercial agriculture was an important external factor that impinged on the lives of those who lived in the forest. Forest products like honey, beeswax, and gum lax were in great demand. Some such a gum lax became major items of overseas export from India in the 17th century. Elephants were also captured and sold. Trade involved an exchange of commodities and through barter as well. Some tribes like the Lohanis in the Punjab were engaged in overland trade between India and Afghanistan, and in the town country trade in the Punjab itself. Social factor to wrought changes in the lives of forest dwellers like the big men of the village community. Tribes also had their chieftains. Many tribal chiefs had become zamindars, some even become king. For that they required to build up an army. They recruited people from their lineage group or demanded that their fraternity provided military services. Tribes in the Sindh region had armies comprising 6,000 cavalry and 7,000 infantry. In Assam, the Ahom kings had their pikes, people who were obliged to render military service in exchange for land. The capture of wild elephant was declared a royal monopoly by the Ahom kings. Though the transition of the tribal to a monarchical system had started much earlier, the process seems to have become fully developed only by the 16th century. This can be seen from the Ains observation on the existence of tribal kingdoms in the northwest, where was a common occurrence. For instance, the Koch kings fought and subjugated a number of neighboring tribes in a long sequence of war through the 16th and 17th centuries. New cultural influences also began to penetrate into forested zones. Some historians have indeed suggested that Sufi saint Menespears played a major role in the slow acceptance of Islam among agricultural communities emerging in newly colonized places. See also chapter 6. Discuss. Find out which areas are currently identified as forest zones in your state and life in these areas changing today. Are the factors responsible for these changes different from or identical to those mentioned in this section? Comment this. The Zamindars. Our story of agrarian relation in Mughal India will not be complete without referring to a class of people in the countryside. that lived off agriculture but did not participate directly in the processes of agricultural production. These were the zamindars who were landed proprietors who also enjoyed certain social economic privilege by virtue of their superior status in rural society. Caste was one factor that accounted for the elevated status of zamindars. Another factor was that they performed certain services khidmat for the state. The zamindars held extensive personal lands termed milkiyat, meaning property. Milkiyat lands were cultivated for the private use of zamindars, often with the help of hired or servile labor. The zamindars could sell, bequeath, or mortgage these lands at will. Zamindars also derived their power from the fact that they could often collect revenue on behalf of the state, a service for which they were compensated financially. Control over military resources was another source of power. Most zamindars had fortresses, kalichas, as well as the armed contingent comprising units of cavalry, artillery, and infantry. Thus, if we visualized social relations in the Mughal countryside as a pyramid, zamindars clearly constituted its very narrow apex. Abul Fazl's account indicates that the upper caste, Brahmana Rajput, combined had already established firm control over rural society. It has reflects a fairly large representation from the so-called intermediate caste, as we saw earlier, as well as the liberal sprinkling of Muslim zamindars. Contemporary documents give an impression that conquest may have been the source of the origin of the some zamindars. The dispossession of weaker people by a powerful military chieftains was quite often a way of expanding a zamindar. It is, however, unlikely that the state would have allowed such a show of aggression by a zamindar unless he had been confirmed by a imperial order sanod. More important were the slow processes of the Jamindari consolidation, which are also documented in sources. This involves colonizations of new lands by transfer of rights by order of the state and by purchase. These were the processes which perhaps permitted people belonging to the relatively lower castes to enter the rank of Jamindars. And Jamindaris were bought and sold quite briskly in the period. A parallel army. According to the Ain, the combined military strength of the Jamindars in Mughal India was 3,84,558 cavalry and 42,77,057 infantry and 1,863 elephant, 4,260 cannons and 4,500 boats. A combination of factors also allowed the consolidation of clan or lineage-based jamindaris. For example, the Rajput and Jats adopted these strategies to consolidate their control over vast swathes of territory in northern India. Likewise, peasant pastoralists like the Sadgops carved out powerful jamindars in areas of central and southwestern Bengal. Jamindar spearheaded the colonization of the agricultural land and helped in settling cultivators by providing them with the meaning of cultivation, including cash loans. The buying and selling of jamindars accelerated the process of monetizations in the countryside. In addition, jamindars sold the produce from their Milikat lands. There is evidence to show that the jamindars often established market means huts of which peasants also come to sell their produce. Although there can be little doubt that jamindars were an exploitative class, their relationship with the peasantry had an element of reciprocity paternalisms and patronage. Two aspects reinforce this view. First, the Bhakti saint who eloquently condemned caste base and other forms of oppressions. See also chapter 6 did not portray the Jamindars or interestingly the moneylender as exploiters or oppressor of the peasantry. Usually it was the revenue official of the state who was the object of their fury. Second, in a large number of agrarian uprisings which erupted in North India in the 17th century, Jamindars often received the support of the peasantry in their struggle against the state. Discuss the Jamindari system was abolished in the India after independence. Read through this section the identified reasons why this was done. Comment this. Land revenue system. Revenue from the land was the economic mainstay of the Mughal Empire. It was therefore vital for the state to create an administrative apparatus to ensure control over agricultural production and to fix and collect revenue from across the length and the breadth of the rapidly expanding empire. The apparatus, including the office drafters of the Diwan who was responsible for supervising the fiscal system of the empire, thus revenue officials and record keepers penetrated the agricultural domain and became a decisive agents in shaping agrarian relations. The Mughal state tried to first acquire specific information about the extent of the agricultural lands in the empire and what these land produced before fixing the burdens of taxes on people. The land revenue arrangement consisted of two stages: first assessment and then actual collection. The Jama was the amount assessed as opposed to hasil, the amount collected. In his list of duties of the Amir Gujar or revenue collector, Akbar decreed that while he should strive to make cultivators pay in cash, the option of payment in kind was also to be kept open. While fixing revenue, the attempt of the state was to maximize its claim. The scope of the actually realizing these claims was, however, sometimes uh, thwarted by local condition. Both cultivated and cultivable lands were measured in each province. The Ain compiled the aggregate of such lands during Akbar's rule. Efforts to measure lands continued under subsequent emperors. For instance, in 1665, Aurangzeb expressly instructed his revenue official to prepare annual record for the number of cultivators in each village or 7. Yet not all areas were measured successfully. As we have seen forest covered huge areas of the subcontinent and thus remain unmeasured. Amin was an official responsible for ensuring the imperial regulation were carried out in the provinces. Classification of land under Akbar. The following is a listing of criteria of classification accepted from the Ain. The Emperor Akbar, in the profound sagacity, classified the land and fixed a different revenue to be paid by each. Plage is the land which is annually cultivated for each crop in succession and is never allowed to lie fallow. Parauti is the land left out of the cultivation for a time that is may recover its strength. Chachad is a land that has laid fallow for 3 or 4 years. Banjar is land cultivated, uncultivated for 5 years and more. Of the first two kinds of land, there are the three classes: good, middling, and bad. They add together the produce of such each sort, and the third of these represent the medium produce. One third part which is exacted as a royalties. What principles did the Mughal state follow while classifying lands in its territories? How was revenue addressed? Comment this. The expansion of the Mughal Empire. Babur's reign 1530, Akbar's reign 1605, Aurangzeb's reign 1707. Samarkand, Balkh, Kabul, Kandahar, Lahore, Panipat, Delhi, Agra, Patna, Rohtas, Amber, Ajmer, Goa, Bay of Bengal, Arabian Sea. What impact do you think the expansion of empire would have had a land revenue collection? Comment this. The Mansabdari system. The Mughal administrative system had at its apex military cum bureaucratic apparatus Mansabdari, which was responsible for looking after the civil and military affairs of the state. Some Mansabdar were paid to cash, Nakti, while the majority of them are paid through assignment of the revenue jagirs in different regions of the empire. They were transferred periodically. See also chapter 9. Cash or kind. The ain or land revenue collection let him the Amil Gujar not make it a practice of the taking only in cash but also in kind. The latter is affected in several ways. First, kankut in the Hindi language can signifies grain and kut estimates if any doubt arise. The crop should be cut and estimated in three lots, the good, the middling, and the inferior, and the hesitation removed. Often too, the land taken by appraisement gives a sufficiently accurate return. Secondly, batai, also called bhauli. The crops are reaped and stacked and divided by agreement in the presence of the parties, but in this case, several intelligent inspectors are required, otherwise, the evil-minded and false are given to deception. Thirdly, khel batai, khet batai. When they divide the fields after they shown. Fourthly, lang batai. After cutting the grain, they form it in heaps and divide it among themselves, and each takes his share home and turns it to profit. With what difference would each of the system of assessment and collection of revenue have made to the cultivator? Comment this. The Jama. This is an excerpt from Aurangzeb's order to his revenue officers 1665. He should direct the Amins of Parganas that they should discover the actual conditions of cultivation, Mawjudat, village by village, peasant wise, Assami word, and after minute scrutiny, assesses the Jama, keeping in view the financial interest, kifayat of the government and the welfare of the peasantry. What do you think the emperor insisted on a detailed survey? Comment this. Discuss. Would you consider the land revenue system of the Mughal as a flexible one? Comment this. The flow of silver. The Mughal Empire was among the large territorial empire in Asia that had managed to consolidate power and resources during the 16th and 17th centuries. These empires were the Ming, means China, Safavid, Iran, Ottoman, Turkey. The political stability achieved by all these empires helped create vibrant networks of overland trade from China to the Mediterranean Sea. Voyages of discovery and the opening of the new world resulted in the massive expansion of Asia, particularly India's trade with Europe. This resulted in a greater geographical diversity of India's overseas trade as well as a silver rupee issued by Akbar, versed and reversed. A silver rupee issued by Aurangzeb. Expansion in the community composition of this trade. An expanding trade brought in huge amount of silver bullion into Asia to pay for goods procured from India, and a large part of that bullion gravitated towards India. This was good for India as it did not have natural resources of silver. As a result, the period between the 16th and 18th centuries was also remarked by the remarkable stability in the availability of metal currency, particularly the silver rupaya in India. The facilitated an unprecedented expansion minting of coins and the circulation of the money in the economy, as well as the ability of the Mughal state to extract taxes and revenue in cash. The testimony of an Italian traveler, Giovanni Caderi, who passed through India in 1690, provides a graphic account about the way silver traveled across the globe to reach India. It also gives us an idea of the phenomenal amounts of cash or commodity transaction in 17th century India. An example of textile produced in subcontinent to meet the demand of European markets. Discuss. Find out whether there are any taxes on agricultural production at present in your state. Explain the similarities and differences between Mughal fiscal policies and those adopted by present-day state governments. Comment this. How silver came to India. This excerpt from the Giovanni Cadori's accounts based on Bernier's account gives an idea of enormous amount of wealth that found its way into a Mughal empire. Thus, the reader may form some idea of the wealth of this Mughal empire. He is to observe that all the gold and silver which circulate throughout the world at least centers there. It is well known that as much is come out of America after running through several kingdoms of Europe goes partly into uh, Turkey for several sorts of commodities as part into Persia by the way of Smyrna of silk. Now the Turks not being able to abstain from coffee which comes from Yemen, Oman and Arabia, not Persia, Arabia, and the Turks themselves to go without the commodities of India send vast quantities of money, or to Makkah, on the Red Sea near Babel's Mandal, to Basra, at the bottom of the Persian Gulf, which is afterwards sent over the ships to Hindustan. Besides the Indian, Dutch, English, Portuguese ships, and every year carry the commodities of Hindustan to Pegu, the necessary parts of Myanmar, Siam, Thailand, Ceylon, Sri Lanka, the Maldives Island, Mozambique, and the other places must of necessity convey much gold and silver thither from those countries. All that the Dutch fetch from the mines in Japan sooner or later goes to Hindustan, and the goods carried hence into Europe, whether to France, England, or Portugal, are all purchased for ready money, which remains there. 8. The Aini Akbari of Abul Fazl Allami. The Aini Akbari was the culmination of a large historical administrative project of the classification undertaken by Abul Fazl. At the order of Emperor Akbar, it was completed in 1598, the 42nd regional year of the empire, after having gone through 5 revisions. The Ain was part of the larger project of history writing commissioned by Akbar. This history, known as the Akbarnama, comprised 3 books. The first 2 provided a historical narrative. We will look at this part more closely in chapter 9, the Aini Akbari. The third book was organized as a compendium of imperial regulation and a gazetters of the empire. The Ain gives details account of the organizations of the court, administration and army, the sources of revenue, and the physical layout of the provinces of Akbar's empire, and the literary, cultural, and religious tradition of people, along with a description of the various departments of Akbar government and elaborate description of the various provinces, main subas of the empire, The Ain gives us intricate quantitative information of those provinces. Collecting and compiling this information systematically was an important imperial exercise. It informed the emperor about the varied and diverse customs and practices prevailing across his extensive territories. The Ain is therefore a mine of information for us about the Mughal Empire during Akbar's reign. It is important, however, to keep in mind that this is a view of the regions from the center, a view of society from its apex. The Ain is made of five books, means chapters, of which the first three books describe the administration. The first book, called Manjil Abadi, concerns the imperial household and its maintenance. The second book, Sipai Abadi, covers the military and civil administration and the establishment of servants. This book includes the notice and short biographical sketches of imperial official, mansab, that is, landmen, poets, and artists. The third book, Mulk Abadi, is the one which deals with the fiscal side of the empire and provided rich quantitative information on revenue rates, followed by the account of the 12 provinces. This section has detailed statistical information which includes the geographic, topographic, and economic profile of all subas and their administrative and fiscal divisions, sarkars, parganas, and mahas, total measured area, and assessed revenue, means jama. After setting out detail at the Suba level, the Ain goes on to give a detailed picture of the sarkars below the Suba. This it does in the form of tables which have 8 columns giving the following information. 1. Parganat, means or Mahal, to Kaila ports. 3. Araj and the Jamin-e Paimura, means measured area. 4. Nakdi, revenue assessed in cash. 5. Sugurghal, grants of revenue in the charity. 6. Zamindars, columns 7 and 8 contains details of castes, Zamindars and their troops, including their horsemen, means Savar, foot soldier, Pada, and elephants, Phil. The Mulk Abadi gives a fascinating detail, the highly complex view of agrarian society in northern India. The fourth and the fifth books drafted deal with the religious, literary, and cultural tradition of the peoples of India. Also contains a collection of Akbar's auspicious sayings. Abul Fazl presenting the manuscript of the completed Akbarnama to his patron. Mustering the rose garden of fortune. In this extract, Abul Fazl gave a vivid account of how and from whom he collected his information. To Abul Fazl, son of Mubarak, the sublime mandate was given, right with the pen of sincerely the account of glorious event and of our dominion conqueror victorious assuredly. I spent much labor and research in collecting the record and narratives of his majesty action, and I was a long time interrogating the servants of the state and the old members of the illustrious family. I examined both prudent, truth-speaking old men and active-minded, right-action young ones, and reduced their statements to writing. The royal commands were issued to the provinces that noise those who from old services remembered with certainty or which admissible of doubt. The events of past should copy out the notes and memoranda and transmit them to the court. Then a second command shone forth from the holy presence, a chamber to which that the material which had been collected should be recited in the royal hearing, and whatever might have to be written down afterwards should be introduced into the noble volume as a supplement, and that such details as on account of the minuteness of the inquiries and the minute of affairs which could not then be brought to an end should be inserted afterwards at my leisure. Being relieved by the royal order interpreter of the divine ordinance from the secret anxiety of my heart, I proceed to reduce into writing the rough drafts, drafts which were void of the grace of arrangement of style. You obtained the chronicle of the event beginning of the 19 years of the divine era, which the record of which was established by the enlightened intellects of His Majesty and from its rich pages. I gathered the accounts of many events. Great pains too were taken to procure the original or copies of most of the order which had been issued to the provinces from the associations up to present day. I also took much trouble to incorporate many of the reports which minister and high official had submitted about the affair of the empire and the events of foreign countries, and my labor-loving souls was satiated by the apparatus of inquiry and research. I also exerted myself energetically to collect the rough notes and memoranda of sagacious and well-informed men. By this means, I constructed a reservoir for irrigating and moistening the rose garden of fortune, the Akbarnama. List all the sources that Abul Fazl used to compile his work. Which of these sources would have been most useful for arriving at an understanding of agrarian relations? To what extent do you think his work would have been influenced by the relationship with Akbar? Comment this. Translating the Ain. Given the importance of the Ain, it has been translated for use by a number of scholars. Henry Bloxman edited it, and the Asiatic Society of Bengal, Calcutta, present day Kolkata, published it in its Bibliotheca Indica series. The book has also been translated into English in 3 volumes. The standard translation of volume 1 is that of Henry Boltzmann, Calcutta, 1873. The other 2 volumes were translated by H.S. Jarrett, Calcutta, 1891 to 1894. Although the Ain was officially sponsored to record detailed information to facilitate Emperor Akbar govern his empire, it was much more than a reproduction of official paper. That the manuscript was revised 5 times by the author would suggest a high degree of caution on the part of Abul Fazl's and his search for authenticity. For intense oral testimonials were cross-checked and verified before being incorporated as fact in the chronicles. In the quantitative section, all numeric data were reproduced in words so as to minimize the chances of subsequent transcriptional errors. Historians who have carefully studied the end point out that it is not without its problem. Numerous errors in totaling have been detected. These are ascribed to simple slips of arithmetic or of transcription by Abul Fazl's assistant. These are generally minor and do not detract from the overall quantitative veracity of the manuals. Another limitation of the Ain is the somewhat skewed nature of the quantitative data. Data were not collected uniformly from all provinces. For instance, while for many subas detailed information was compiled about the caste composition of the Zamindars, such information is not available for Bengal and Orissa. Further, while the fiscal data from the subas is remarkable for its richness, some equally vital parameters such as prices and wages from these some areas are not as well as documented. The detailed list of prices and wages that the Ain does provide is mainly derived from data pertaining to areas in or around the imperial capital of Agra, and is therefore of limited relevance for the rest of the country. The limitation notwithstanding, the aims remain the extraordinary documents of its time by providing fascinating glimpses into the structure and organization of the Mughal Empire and by giving us quantitative information about its product and peoples. Abul Fazl achieved a major breakthrough in the tradition of the medieval chronicles, who wrote most about remarkable political events, were concave political machinations and dynastic turmoil. Information about the country, its people, and its products were mentioned only incidentally and as embellishment to the essentially political thrust of the narrative. The end completely departed from the tradition as it recorded information of the empire and the people of India and thus constituted a benchmark for studying in the turn of 17th century. The value of the ancient quantitative evidence is uncontested for the study of agrarian relations in concern. But it is the information it contains on people, their processes, professions and trades, and on the imperial establishment and the grandness of empire, which enables historians to reconstruct the social fabric of India at that time. Timeline. Landmarks in the history of the Mughal Empire. 1526, Babur defeats Ibrahim Lodi. The Delhi Sultan at Panipat becomes the first Mughal emperor. 1530 to 40, first phase of Humayun's reign. 1540 to 55, Humayun is defeated by Sher Shah in exile at the Safavid court. 1555 to 56, Humayun regains lost territories. 1556 to 1605, reign of Akbar. 1605 to 27, reign of Jahangir. 1628 to 58, reign of Shah Jahan. 1658 to 1707, reign of Aurangzeb. 1739, Nadir Shah invades India and sacks Delhi. 1761, Ahmed Shah Abdali defeats the Marathas and the Third Battle of Panipat. 1765, the Diwani of Bengal transferred to the East India Company. 1857, last Mughal ruler Bahadur Shah II deposed by the British and exiled to Rangoon, present-day Yangon, Myanmar. Answer in 100 to 150 words. Comment this. Write a short essay about 250 to 300 words on the following. Comment this. A 17th century painting depicting jewelers. Map work. On an outline map of the world, mark the areas which had economic links with the Mughal Empire and trace out possible routes of communication. Comment this. Project, choose one. 11. Visit a neighboring village. Find out how many people live there, which crops are grown, which animals are raised, which artisanal groups reside there, whether women own land, how the local panchayat function. Compare this information with what you have learned about the 16th-17th century. Nothing similarities and differences. Explain both the changes and the continuities that you find. Comment this. 12. Select a small section of the end 10 to 12 pages available online at the website indicated below. Read it carefully and prepare a report on how it can be used by a historian. Comment this. A painting depicting a woman selling sweets.